victory. That's sad.
What do you figure they spent on, what did the textile
I
workers
figure they
spend on
spent
the
at least
boycott?
20 million.
Okay.
That
I
would've
read
been-
the Wall Street Journal, so,
Yeah,
you know, I forget the kid's name. You remember, he was an activist kid that
Yeah.
was in charge of it. It's like the reformers in the UMW. He made his reputation with that boycott.
Yeah.
Do you know he's ever since been a boycott expert?
yeah.
If you followed his career,
No, I haven't.
he's
followed.
used in boycott
Yeah.
after boycott.
Yeah,
Like, for instance, I think he was laid off by the machinists recently because they've used him for a year or two
yeah.
in some big machine
Rogers'
shop.
name?
Huh?
Was it Rogers?
Yeah, yeah, and they've used him, and you see, the companies have learned a lot since then.
Yeah,
Not everybody is as vulnerable as the head of J.P. Stevens serving on this bank board, and that as
Yeah.
soon as they get into trouble, they resign their bank director. It leaves him less targeting, you remember?
yeah.
In fact, if you know, you and I have talked frankly enough about a lot of these things, and I know with Leonard when he was around, for the reformers in the UMW, they were not the most skilled organizers. What they were guys that had about as easy a target as anybody in history ever had.
Yeah.
Tony Boyle talked tough, little, you know, short, jerky words. He sort of was a little dark complected and had dark rings under his eyes, looking dissipated. His wife wore, you know, $60,000 worth of jewelry.
Yeah.
He wore a black fedora hat. If you dreamed up a character, you know, to say, we're going to target on this basket. And this is what Rogers had to target
Yeah.
on. I mean, a company that was condemned
Yeah.
by the NLRB over and over, condemned by the U.S. Court of Appeals, condemned by everything in God's name, you know. It was like a dreamboat to go after, and their president serving on bank boards.
I talked in D.C. With some people that are dealing, you know, are stockbrokers and whatnot.
Yeah.
They claim that J.P. Stevens didn't suffer a damn bit as far as
The boycott?
the boycott was concerned financially.
Well, let me ask, if that's true, how do they explain the capitulation? There was a reason for it. They wanted to serve on bank board. There was something the boycott
I don't
achieved.
know. I
See,
don't
my
know.
view is not that I'd take a different view, Eli, that the boycott as a mechanism worked, as an activist mechanism, but that it is not the answer because the workers don't go into motion to defeat
Yeah,
the
sure.
enemy. And even looking back now at Barbara Koppel's Harlan County, USA, what was missing from that film, she had all the excitement of the Brookside strike.
Yeah.
You remember? She had the excitement of the women's movement in support of the strike. She had the beautiful confrontations with these backward sheriffs and the company guys that would be interviewed, you know, that
Yeah.
it gave it drama, which she
Yeah.
couldn't create in your, you know, for your
Sure.
film. And what was missing was, when you analyze that strike, Duke Power Company capitulated not because of everything she was showing, in my opinion. They would have let them stay out there forever, but that the activists spent a fortune in the Washington office and sent people down to Duke University,
Yeah.
to Carolina, to all the universities there, and had huge picket lines around Duke Power Company offices. And I'm not saying, do you remember, we used to use pensioners for that.
Yeah.
I've known you to do that in the
Yeah.
50s, isn't that right?
Yeah.
It would be UMW pensioners going up there and picketing Wall Street. You remember when you couldn't organize Preston County?
Yeah.
But when I'm saying all these boycotts, if the truth be known, I do think they have an effectiveness, but they also rob the workers. And it was, what have you got left if you don't have a rank and file that you mobilized and brought into motion, you know?
That's the key.
And that's what you told them at Roanoke Rapids.
That's the key.
Take this Roanoke Rapids base and break out into the whole South, you remember?
That's it.
Use it as a breakout, like
Yeah.
a military officer would, you know?
Yeah.
Take them, give them weeks of education, train them to be organized, and turn them loose into these camps, you know, with...
It should have been, but it wasn't.
Yeah, but you were again talking about using the workers. You weren't saying,
Right.
step up the money for Rogers. You know what I mean? You were at a different approach. You know.
Yeah. Well, that's the only approach.
Yeah, and I'm simply saying I believe that they came to rely as a union on boycotts. Okay. Just as they won the Brookside strike,
Yeah.
honestly, in my opinion, not because of what she's portraying. You know, in that film, those poor goddamn workers, you know why? It was a small mine, as Duke Power went. If it had to sacrifice it, it would have. But by then, it couldn't stand this image that was happening to it. It controlled all electric power in the Piedmont region of North and South Carolina and was beginning to look like a monkey at home, you know. And I think those kind of farable, all of those have a great danger. Somebody told me that the Farah boycott, you remember, of the jeans and all that stuff, that today they do not have stable local unions of the amalgamated anywhere, and yet the Farah collapsed under that boycott.
Yeah.
Well, what good is a boycott if you don't end up with local unions
Well, that's
of workers?
That's it. There was no accent put on the real nitty gritty.
Well, you know, we could say the same thing. It is a parallel to the beautiful young activists, of which David McAteer was an example. They were there by the dozens, okay? They all went on to great careers in law and great careers in everything. And in the Senate, you know, with committees, some of them, Rich Banks, all those people. But you ended up with Sam Church in charge of the union. You know what I mean? It ended up with a sort of nothingness that couldn't organize. And maybe under Rich Trunka now, totally separated from the activists, you know, you can again restore a coal miner union, you know. Hopefully. But, you know, I don't believe you can do it without the workers. That's what they would try. They tried to do it without the workers. That's what I think.
The ingredient has to be the worker, number one.
But don't you agree? I mean, the activists tried to do it without him. They would have smart people in charge of each department. You know?
They didn't.
I'll tell you what you can use. You can use them. You can use them to write a legal brief. You can use them to do research. That's their place. But it's just like the British unions. Use them for their technical capacity, but never in decision making, policy making, and never in organizing, whatever you do, or in negotiations. You know.
So that's where it's just ass backwards.
Yeah. And this is what we learned early in the 30s. I mean, you were taught by older men, never. I mean, these people are used as journalists, they're used in technical capacities. But the workers must get skilled at what they've got to do in leadership. You know, if they don't do the organizing, they don't do... You can even bring them along if they have skills in organizing, but there must be workers in charge of all this stuff.
It has to be.
And I think that you pay a terrible price when you violate that, you know.
Well, that's the price that we're paying for today.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that you've got less than 20% organization throughout the jurisdiction of the United States, and it's slowly withering. Well, it's rapidly withering.
You remember when you first went to North Carolina, I told you, and I think you could attest to it in the areas you saw. I said, I don't know those areas as well, but in the Greensboro, High Point, Thomasville areas that I knew well as a boy, there was more union organization at the end of the 30s than there was when I go back today. In other words, I go into the same cotton mill villages and they're non-union that were union then.
Yeah.
There is something wrong. I mean, when there's no continuity to the union's capability. Not only that, some of those unions were like the mine workers. You could go to Highland Cotton Mill, Local 319. They had a Saturday night, they sponsored a Saturday night square dance. There was never less than 400 or 500 couples that came for 50 miles around. If there was a street light issue that they wouldn't put street lights in, there would be a delegation would mob the city council meeting. Why don't the working class, have street lights and paved streets? They did things. Today, the labor movement lays there dead. I mean, they're afraid in the South, You don't gain anything through fear, You just increase it. And I'm afraid the steelworkers' leadership, I'm afraid maybe you have more respect. I have never had respect for the steelworkers' leadership as such, compared to mine workers or even auto workers.
I haven't.
They have always I don't know if you read one of these biographies. Lendico was close to John L. Lewis, and he wrote an autobiography of his life, and he quotes Lewis a number of times. Lewis sent him into Pittsburgh, and before he sent him, he said, he leaned back in his chair, and it's in the biography. He says, "Before you go, Len, let me just tell you, Phil's a good man. They hadn't broken yet, and he's heading this operation. But Phil's got a weakness, He says, I guess I'm Welsh, and you'd regard me as Protestant, but there's no preachers allowed in the UMW headquarters, okay? Don't get surprised if Phil can't think a thing through if there's 4 or 5 priests around the outside of his office, He said, Phil doesn't always, without me around, think all these things through. So you get there. I want to sort of end this situation. If he don't know what to do, you get on the phone to me. I mean, I don't want any longer. If he needs a press release, he calls in Father so-and-so, to prepare the draft press release. Let's keep it a labor movement, okay? And really, that stuck in my mind. That there was I couldn't put my finger. What was it that was different about the steel headquarters? It was always dull. It was dull. The mine workers were sort of exciting, and the steel workers were a dull headquarters. UAW was the most live of all the new unions, So I'm not surprised if steel came under enormous attack. I mean, if they don't... it isn't just the give-backs, it's that the angriest local unions, angrier than even UAW, some of the big steel locals, at Homestead, in town after town up there.
What's the sad thing of what's going on there? As a matter of fact, the industry's going to... It's going to disappear. Apparently, the monies are overseas.
Mm-hmm.
The development is overseas for production as far as steel, and the money coming from overseas here, and I don't know. It's sad.
Well, it's a disease of the entire labor movement. It's a disease of the American working class. And I don't think any of us foresaw it, truthfully. I mean, I know what I'm seeing and what I think of what I'm seeing, namely that there is that, for instance, amongst the workers, there's no question Reagan is more highly regarded, say, than Carter, because they're not class conscious. So he looks like a nice guy. They accept him at face value, that way, don't they?
He's totally accepted.
Yeah. And there's no question he is. One guy's regarded as a nuclear engineer whose head's in the clouds, and this guy does have a sense of humor. He has the qualities that can lead to acceptance, It's scary, though, because in no other civilized country would there be so little class not to know. The British workers, if they're going to pay a terrible price if they don't know who they're dealing with, and maybe they won't. I don't know anymore. I used to think I had some of the answers, Eli. Now it's all tougher, isn't it?
I just don't understand, honest to God. Maybe out of it all, some person will loom to the forefront that might give direction.
Well, we thought it, to me, Teddy Kennedy represented a possibility in this area. I think the Kennedy dynasty has always been very smart at knowing probably that you do it with the times, and this is not the times.
Apparently not.
What I really fear is, can we even hold a society together enough to ever come back?
Well,
hope.
It looks like we're waiting for the pieces to fall apart to the pieces and pick up the pieces.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like the end.
It doesn't work like that, does it?
No, it's the end.
You know, if you're waiting for the peace, you know, that's like waiting, let's let the Depression get worse so we can organize the workers. Well, they really don't organize in 1931, 32. They organize when they see Roosevelt in there and they're coming out of the Depression, you know. That's a sort of Marxist mistake, a crude one, you know, to think that when they're starving their worst, they're ready to organize. They're not ready at that point. They're too fearful, you know.
I don't know whether they're fearful or they just know. There's no leadership, I know.
Well, that's the other thing. In the 30s, you had leadership, Eli. I think
Reagan,
that's a real...
Where's opposition to Reagan?
Yeah.
There's no opposition
No,
to Reagan.
there's not a decent candidate on the front, Democratic front.
So, take it from there. He's running roughshod.
Well, the other thing is, in what other Western industrial country is there just no left? In other words, there are people here who will tell you that, you know, the left is Teddy Kennedy. He's a left wing. I mean, they don't understand. He's a capitalist who's doing the best thing like Roosevelt did in the capitalist interest to save the system. You know? I mean, a left is a totally different thing in Italy or in France or in England. A left is usually a working class person who's given up on capitalism, you know, and is either a socialist guy or something over there, you know. What do you got here? These communists, these are like crazies, you know, college students running crazy, you know, this is not a left that, you know, we see in the rest of the world.
Yeah.
And a left is useful to have around because by a left being there, a guy like Kennedy can say, I am a central figure. I can do it without, you know.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? We don't have that capability here.
We don't really.
There isn't one of the Democrats that appeals to me. I mean,
There-
Mondale is worn out and connected with Carter.
He's
connected with
useless,
Carter. He's
right?
useless, yeah. You know, to tell me that the guy we know least, the Ohio astronaut, is the answer. Sure, we know so little about him, and that he's the least target for Reagan to shoot at. You see.
There you go.
But that's a hell of a way to pick your candidate, right?
That's no way to travel.
Remember, they tried to tell us Eisenhower would have been a good Democratic Party candidate, but he decided he was a Republican. So
There you go.
that's not a
We have
policy.
enough of that.
Well, old timers like us, this shows you're over the hill when you sit and you can't find anything right with the world. What do you think, Eli? Huh?
Well, you may have a point there.
There must be something wrong when we don't find a way to say that. I'm not. Let me put it this way, and I think you're the same way. I'm really optimistic about human nature. I don't believe that, although I can't see how, that the workers will sit still somewhere like the Rick and Arrow came up, a kid that I can have some hope in. Okay. Somewhere in each industry, there will rise from the grassroots a leadership. Now, will the college kids get out of the way if they bring them forward and let them do it, their thing, you know, as workers?
What's the attitude of the college scene?
Well,
Are they quiet?
yeah, they're quiet. College students are more conservative than ever.
Yeah.
The biggest single curriculum they take is business administration. There never were more college graduates at any point in all American history than today, and there were never more in numbers coming out that have nowhere to go.
Yeah.
In other words, there is no market because middle-level management is being laid off by Republic Steel by the thousands, by, let's take Rochester. It used to be a successful non-union town.
Yeah.
Eastman, Kodak, and Xerox, progressive non-union companies, you know,
Yeah.
progressive in quotes. They've just finished the biggest layoffs in their history, including their management. You know, it scares the living hell out of these kids. They take more and more accounting courses. They take more and more technical courses, more and more computer, you know. The thoughtful courses they have no room for. And yet, how do you think, I'll put it to you another way. In Japan and in Germany, our two worst competitors that can knock us out of the box in autos and steel and things, computers, They do not even know what a school of business administration is. There are no MBAs. And in our country, all we have is MBAs taking over industry, you know. Doesn't that give you a little warning that you blame the blue-collar worker for the problems, right? He's paid too much, he got too much fringe benefits, and you never look around and say, but maybe the Japanese don't have all these levels of managers above him, you know? Maybe that's why they exercise together, you know, and get along. It's a different society, you know, it's more complex, but maybe he isn't always feeling that, hell, he's outnumbered by the numbers of managers above him.
I don't know.
In the steel industry, before these layoffs, they had moved up from 40 non-production employees per 100 on the line to between 65 and 75.
Sorry.
That means all levels of white-collar people, all levels of supervision. You see, wait, those ratios are unheard of, you know?
Yeah.
In other words, in Japan, a man who's a quality control engineer, trying to make sure the fenders are good and the cars are good, is just another part of the production process at a higher pay. In this country, he becomes a fourth-level manager. He's 2 levels above a foreman level. At each stage, it's like that. You follow me? We introduce levels of management. You walk into a goddamn bank, and a person who's a clerk is called assistant vice president the first 2 days he's there, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's ridiculous, isn't it? The only people who work in a bank are the actual girls you don't see sorting checks.
I know.
And the cashiers. And everybody else is some kind of assistant to a vice president or a vice president, right?
Right.
We've got game playing going on here, you know. Well, we get a long way from where we started out. But your life's been a rich one. I think the Roanoke Rapids one was in many ways the culmination of a career. The culmination doesn't mean, you know, the completion of it. It was a high point historically. It gave you a chance to express everything you'd learned up to that point in, I don't say with relative freedom, but despite the interference, you still pulled it off, you know.
Yeah, well, that's the nice thing about it.
I guess you did. They either left you alone enough that despite interfering.
They left me alone enough.
Yeah, if they hadn't left you alone, you couldn't have done it, could you?
I know MacIver was, he said that I was his friend more than once. And if I'm told I'm a friend more than once, I question the friendship. And that's how I let that at that.
Yeah. But they really didn't keep you.
He was a director.
Yeah.
And,
was that woman any use to you they sent in from the north? She was just a useless...
Well, I feel sorry for her. She was...
displaced up there, I guess, huh?
Just sort of displaced.
Of course, that's true. In the South, they generally have a few old-time directors, and then displaced northern people. They want to get out of a local. They want a former president. They don't want him to fight them, so they get rid of him.
Right.
They don't care where they organize them.
Well, apparently not. That's the sad part.
But she didn't get in your way either in that situation.
Oh, no.
She didn't have enough leadership to get in your way.
No, as a matter of fact, I had no problem with the supposed college boys.
How many of those did you have in there? Who were they? I didn't remember.
Peter Gallaudet went on to
Peter
become a
who?
lawyer. Peter Gallaudet, I think.
He was in there at the time? Where'd they pick him up at, you know?
He was in college student.
At Carolina, or Duke, or somewhere there, or further
He was
on?
up in Boston or somewhere.
And they sent him down to be with you?
Yeah.
And he gave you a good service, huh?
Well, like I say, he could have maybe questioned my tactics, which he did, but he soon fell by the wayside. We had some auto worker, one auto worker, George, I can't think of his last name.
But you were left in charge pretty well,
Oh, yeah.
without too many troops, just now and then, huh?
Well, At one time, maybe I had as high as eight associates, but I didn't consider them associates in the sense that they worried me. I had to constantly tell them, don't veer from the...
Were any of them skilled organizers?
No, they couldn't.
The auto worker was
They
just
couldn't.
displaced from his
He's a
vicinity.
former local union
President.
officer.
That's, I mean, they
That's
need to
no-
get rid of them in their district, that's all.
That's
Usually,
no,
yeah.
that's no qualification.
No.
The girl was just
Yeah.
like that.
And the college kids were just kids
Just
who
green.
took a week training in the
Yeah.
union headquarters or
Yeah.
something, yeah.
So I
But
was...
they were hands. You could give out leaflets through
Oh,
them.
yeah.
You could do things, right?
I could-
And you
I
did
could
that.
utilize that
Mhm.
for that purpose.
Yeah.
But the bulk of the organizing of the plant leafleting was done by the workers themselves.
Yeah. Then what would you utilize the staff for when you had them? Would you use them for house-to-house contacts?
They
or-
were a level of, at one time, we assigned the various plants
Mhm.
to oversee and use as messenger boys, so to speak. But that didn't work. We had to go right to the worker, and that's why I emphasize the worker. Believe me, what we're talking about,
Mhm.
if you don't have the worker, you don't have an organization.
Did you
Um,
ever break out of Roanoke Rapids? Or you were so intensely there, your policy would have been after the victory to break out, right? Did you ever go anywhere with a delegation or visit?
Well, we weren't permitted in a way. They frowned on that.
They might be losing an election 100 miles away, but they didn't send for you.
Well, we went to other plants, J.P. Stevens plants, to buffer them, so to speak. But it was a waste of time because
The policy there was not a good organizing
Not-
policy.
not a
They were
good
going to
one.
lose.
that's right.
What was McIver's qualities as you saw them? He just had held office long enough?
Well,
Or?
Harold, I look at him today as a career individual. He was working toward a career in the labor movement, and that's how he ended up. What is he doing now? There's no organizing. He's the coordinator in the South. Is there any?
Now, you
organizing?
organized that in what, the years about 73, 74? I can't remember, something in there. Okay, so it's almost 10 years.
It's a vacuum, 10-year vacuum, right?
And he was a new director at that point, or an old one?
No, he was an old one.
He had been in the Charlotte office
Yeah.
as director
Yeah. It's
for
coordinator.
TWA at that time, before Act 2 merger.
He's working out of the
Right.
IUD department.
Now he's in IUD.
Well, he's head of IUD now.
I see. He doesn't have the brains, in your opinion,
Well,
strategic
he
policy.
doesn't have the get up and go.
Yeah, right.
The way I see
The way
it.
you also sensed they were losers when you told me. When you got
Well,
there, they preached,
born
all we
losers.
do is ever lose.
Yeah.
Here, they thought of the
The
South as a
negative
place.
thinking
Yeah.
prevailed. And it's,
They should have been pulled, if that happens to troops, then you pull them away from the front. You send them somewhere else. You
There
do
you go.
something else. You don't leave them with negative thinking.
well, see, the negative thinking just overwhelmed us.
Yeah. Well, if you hadn't gotten out of Charlotte and gotten up there, you really just went in there, talked with them, and took off, huh? Or they sent you, in effect, huh?
Well, that was where I was hired in.
Well, you were hired to go to Roanoke Rapids.
And no, I was hired in Charlotte to go to
Yeah. You were shipped in by the IUD department to Charlotte?
to Charlotte.
Yeah, I knew you went up to Steele first
We
and
went
tried to get a job.
We went to Charlotte, then we leafleted about a dozen plants in South Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
There's Clemson, Taylor's, and various towns,
Mhm.
Greenville.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there was at least a dozen plants that we leafleted, J.P.
Yeah.
Stevens. And then we waited for some mail response. And then we got the response at Roanoke Rapids, about 10% response. and I was assigned
Sent
that.
in, yeah.
Yeah.
So when did you first were hired when in 73? April 73 or?
April 73, and well, April 9th, 2 weeks later, I was in Roanoke Rapids.
Yeah.
That's where I stayed.
And you won the election by what date?
Well, we were ready in the winter, Christmas of 73, but we were postponed and dragged on to August
74.
74. As a
That's
matter
the
of fact,
great victory that's shown in Norma Ray, the count
August
and
the
all.
28th, that's the...
Yeah. Was the events of the way she stood up there, were those exaggerated?
No, not really.
They were essentially what she did, huh?
She was a good student.
Yeah.
She believed in documenting.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, when she stood on the bench, working table, and displayed to the workforce, that was a communication situation.
That was what it said, strike on the big thing?
Union.
It said union, okay.
The reason she was being fired.
Yeah.
That was communicating.
And that's when they stopped work
Yeah.
and pulled the switch.
Yeah. That was
yeah. Well, she had listened well to you.
Yeah.
I remember, on the trips you'd make back about every 3 weeks, we'd get together up at the house on Outlook Road and sit around and have drinks and talk about, because you were, when you began, if I remember right, you came in, you said, you correct me if I'm wrong, your first impressions on a couple of visits were, I don't know what I got here, a bear by the tail, she could be a company fink, or I've got the biggest opportunity of my life. This dame is mixed up, but she's, I don't know what she's doing. She's taking notes, she's doing...
And that's, we could have,
Well, what were the circumstances under which you first saw her? Did she come to the motel? When did she first show up, Crystal Lee Jordan, in the sequence of
the first meeting we had at the Black.
That's right. She brought another white woman and came to
There
the
were
Black.
about 4 or 5 women,
White women that showed up at the Black church.
And I asked this lady organizer who was with me to get their names and meet with them. And that's how it started.
Yeah. Then she did go meet with them and then came back and reported to you?
Well, I think after that meeting, she came by the motel, and
she was already that interested, that meeting.
she was showing some interest from the meeting.
Did you say it was then or later that she began the note-taking? You remember you told me something about she...
Well, I asked her to please come to the union meetings, and that's where she showed up with the
a little pad. She was going to learn, huh?
And as a matter of fact, that's where I got the idea that all the garbage that TWA was sending me as far as leaflets were concerned, that little booklet, What the Company Will Do For You, was a notebook, blank notebook, and I utilized
You might as well
that.
use that, as a note.
So I had them all taking notes. And
you taught them to learn, to make notes on what they're doing. Education, of process.
Communicate and document.
Take it in the plant and write down what you see.
Document every damn
what's
thing.
on the book. You taught her to write down what was on the bulletin board.
Document everything.
What day did they put it up? What hour? You taught her everything.
That's
She was a good student.
That is what organizing is all about, really. People that I worked with, veteran organizers, what am I going to do now? Well, God, it's great. It's nerve-grating. What are we going to do now? There's never a dull moment as far as an organizer is concerned if he's breathing.
Yeah.
And that is where I recognized in a number of the Southern workers the capabilities. Hell, they were tremendous people.
They were so much above their own organizers.
They were.
That was the thing always struck me. They were the most revolutionary almost in the country.
I held them in awe myself.
Yeah.
I held them in awe, and I figured, well, if I can transmit some knowledge to these people, that they should recognize that they're right in doing what they have to do.
Yeah.
For instance, to copy off of a bulletin board, First Amendment rights, you name it. That once they're convinced, there is no way. You got a winner.
Well, when you and I first began talking, I told you the impressions I had, and you confirmed them and went way beyond with them, was that of all the workers in the country, they were almost the most exploited and therefore the most potentially able to come the furthest, you know.
Yeah.
But they needed leadership to do
That's
so,
what
and they had a
they-
whipped leadership generally, you know. And that's what we didn't have in the 30s, is why we could win some elections against the greatest violence and difficulties, because they would stand up to all of that, you know. And they had no tradition like the mine workers, you know, of a long continuity of Mother Jones illness, but they were a beautiful bunch of teachers. I mean, they really responded. You taught them a little something, but then they taught you
Oh yeah.
the tactics of what would make the next move
Sure.
possible, you know.
It was exciting, really.
Yeah, or as you put it, the blacks, you know, it would always be amazing. Some quiet, almost inarticulate sometimes black guy would step forward. You'd say, "Do you think you can sign some cards?" You know, you'd hand them about 8 of them. You think you can get this many? He'd just quietly maybe say, "Give me 80," you know.
Yeah.
And I mean, he'd come back with 79 the next day,
Yeah.
sign, you know.
That's what
It was like, you know, this would be the lesson, you know, what a lesson in leadership, you know.
In a month or so, I had the blacks organized. It was the question
Yeah.
of,
Now you had to break through to the whites.
I had to break through the whites. That's where normal aid
Yeah,
comes
that's
into
right,
play.
yeah,
The men didn't have the balls.
that's right.
The white men didn't have them.
And they were favored, the weave room jobs, they were given the better, they were bought off.
You had that discrimination bit going as far as men and women were concerned. As a result, I don't know. It was just an exciting thing that we could have done it. We could have left Roanoke Rapids with the troops.
Well, that was your whole bit, as I remember it. You
used
said
100 of
with
those.
that thing done, we could now break out into the South, and I can't get this international unit to understand that.
That's right.
They didn't merge in the period you were there. That came later, right? Act 2 was not created.
No, it was
that
still
came later.
TWA.
Yeah.
And I thought Act 2 would do it, but it didn't.
No, I'm afraid, you know, like corporate mergers, a lot of these union mergers are just part of just part of what's got to be done to make, you know, to save these places with their overhead.
Now it's going to be after 10 years, it's going to be hard to go back in. If ever they'll go back in.
Oh, I think it's a very serious question now, whether they can, how they're going to do it.
I don't know. I know, I think you pick up the pieces and go from there, but it takes...
Yeah, they got to come and ask you to do it. I mean, you know.
It takes
It takes some force.
some force to do it.
There's a guy that I have over to the house a lot who's the chief, the honcho of the activists, you know, the publisher of Southern Exposure, a very distinguished quarterly magazine, of Carolina Action, of the Black Brown Lung Movement. He's much smarter than some of the impulsive kids in the field. But I'm willing to bet, and Julian Bond, the very fine state senator from Georgia, who's very progressive, is the chairman of his board, but I believe his alliances with Act 2 now would make him ponder, like I thought if you came down to the house, for sure I'd get you together, but is he capable of doing what ought to be done, like utilizing you? Because he knows where to get the funding, you know what I mean? He knows what to do, you see.
Yeah.
He's very imaginative, very capable. His problem would be, you know, Oh, by the way, you knew they removed that AFL-CIO state president. It was Professor
Hobby?
Wilbur Hobby. Yeah.
Was that right?
Gave him a prison sentence.
What happened?
I don't know the facts. The charges were various types of corruption and mismanagement of
Is that
CETA funds. You know, these
Is that
CETA
right?
training funds. And a black guy and his assistant pleaded that, you know, this was simply taking advantage of them because they failed to get some receipts from poor people for their mileage, you know, and gave them mileage cash. You know, that was their defense. The jury in North Carolina, you know, found them guilty. It looked to me like another part of the charge he was wrong about, you know. And that was that he had set up some printing firm with which he was connected and then contracted them to do his CETA work. So he got a suspended sentence, convicted with a suspended sentence. I don't know what happened to the other guy. And he returned, he picked up his seniority, and he's working in the tobacco plant. He's not well.
Tobacco, yeah.
But he had to step down as state president, and a conservative, less capable, a less progressive guy named E.A. Britt, who was Secretary of Treasury, stepped forward and took that. Now, you know, Hobby was progressive enough to have left certain things in place. For instance, there's a black full-time
Have
staffer.
a little more coffee.
Oh, yeah. Is this your, I don't remember, this your cup?
Be all right.
Don't matter.
I'm shocked.
Well, it's unfortunate because Hobby was one of the principled, in quotes, AFL-CIO state presidents.
Yeah.
There were only 4 or 5 left in the nation, you know, that have very many, you know, the guy here is not outstanding. Wilbur really stood beyond the other southern states he held.
He ran for governor, I think.
No, but you know, he was close to the governor. That's why he got this big CETA grant. He must have endorsed him or something.
Thank you.
And part of it could have been the stupidity of handling federal funds and not understanding, you know, that rules. Part of it looked like, through lack of wisdom and seeing how crooked the governor's office maybe was, you know, and all that the you know, he did it. Well, I don't really know. I can't make up my mind how it happened. I thought I'd tell you that that's what happened to him, though.
I'll be done.
He ended up stepping down. A lot of big headlines, no good for the movement at all, the trade union movement. Yes, you know what I like sometimes? A young kid like Yanero, yesterday on the board, repeatedly said, a trade unionist like myself, you know, now, you and I use terms like that, okay? Otherwise, it's almost gone out of fashion. It means he's out of either a union family where they used, you know. I've had young people say, well, wait a minute, are you out of a craft union? They don't understand. You're using a piece of terminology that's been used by Marxists, by socialists, by the whole early AFL. It had nothing, it was like using brother and sister, right? I mean, you know, it's fascinating to me. Or when I went to the Mexican border, you know, you had to quickly learn that they didn't use that. They used compañero. They used like comrade, you know, regular miners. You know, hey compañero, you come with me. You know, the mineros, the miners. You know, but each place you got to learn a terminology, and this kid used it. Even to me, it's a small thing, but he says, you know, I was very proud at the dinner the other night, as a trade unionist with deep feelings, to see that the speakers were speaking the way of trade. You know, I told Carol Rogers that this morning at the staff meeting. I said, you missed something very important that a lot of the sub-district offices, you know, really valued, which was
were they testimony?
Huh?
They were at a testimony?
The sub-district people. Carol missed it because he went up to the Uniontown thing. And some of the local, locals love to get money. So if they can kick in if they got $600, you can buy $600 tickets. They send 6 guys who like to get in a car and go up, you know. so that you didn't have but 3 or 4 local union presidents there, whereas you had a lot of the sub-district guys because they figured with the president going, they didn't have to.
Yeah.
And then nobody mailed in their $100 for him, whereas Carroll probably could use treasury, he's president of the district, to go.
Sure.
So that the treasury of the district isn't that good that it could afford to send, as a district, a bunch of people, see.
Sure.
But I think you had 3 out of the 4 sub-district guys there, so we're very, maybe the comp guys, wasn't Claypool maybe? I think I saw.
I didn't see him.
I don't know, but Schlosser, I don't remember.
Schlosser, I didn't see Schlosser.
Well, you didn't see it. They told me of people they saw that I couldn't see.
I know, it was quite a mob there.
It was a mob of people. In fact, somebody, we were saying, Carroll didn't call. A whole bunch of people who said they were accepting for 2 people didn't come.
Yeah.
So we said there must have been 40 seats over there, if you added up all the lonely ones.
Yeah.
But then someone else said, what the hell would you have done in that social hour with 40, 50 more trying to push through there? Because the company men all were there. You saw, Alpo, the variety of Consol and Eastern and Southern Ohio guys.
Yeah.
In fact, it was real interesting that a doctor in charge of Consol had come down from Pittsburgh together with a Morgantown benefits chief from the personnel office. And he made some comments really fast. He was sitting with Wong when he was introduced to me, but he said, after we talked a few minutes, he said, what I really like about this gathering is I've met everybody from bankers that I've met here, to I don't meet local union and working miners in a casual way like this. I generally meet them in either a conflict situation or one in which I am telling them, company policy, and I really enjoy meeting them as social equals like this.
Good.
Or where, I think he just walked away from Don Luchetti, realizing this is a man dedicated to controlling healthcare costs through the clinic. He says, that fascinates me that there's so many people interested in things that I have responsibility for. Some of it's bullshit, but,
Sure.
It was an interesting. That's one thing when we throw something. It's sort of a New Deal gathering. I mean, you too many things, and I told this to the AFL-CIO when we were actually, too many times you guys are alone and only meet the UMW people for lobbying, okay? Right. Too many times they're alone.
Yeah.
And truthfully, they both, when you get lonely, you don't have the cross-section. For instance, they are more apt, because of the traditions of the Manchin family, to be susceptible, to bringing Jimmy in as a speaker, you see, where they need I want to show it to you both ways. You guys made a mistake, in my opinion, I said to the AFL guys, on the whole Mandelitis thing, because really that was, even if the governor thought it had to be, wiped out, it was a progressive decision by McGraw and others on the Supreme Court who were coal miners' sons. You just simply say when there's gross negligence, damn it, the man can sue and get millions, okay? You take a piece of lousy mining equipment or something else out after it's condemned and kill a man, then there's no thing like paying him just workman's comp. You let him get his millions for doing that. Instead, you guys folded on that and the UMWs did. On the other hand, you guys don't endorse Manchin for nothing. You wouldn't even endorse Joe Manchin. You follow me? You questioned him. He was against hospital workers organizing at Fairmont General. Then you said he don't get our goddamn endorsement. UMW came right along, ignored all the issues, and endorsed him. Because really the Manchins have a pull into most district officers here. That can. They've always had that. If there's a strike on, they walk up with a $500 bill. But it's in principle way you both need each other. And it was interesting to watch how people hung out with each other. And meet some management and then Hunter. Murray Hunter's always a brilliant guy. That was a thoughtful speech. It was dealing with really historic issues.
An excellent speech.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it'll come to pass what he's talking about.
The big corporations are taking over this industry now, and it'll cost, he said, labor's in the descent, management, which means you will face what John L. did now, and if you don't deal with this, then it's going to cost you.
It'll be a
in the
head-on.
costs. Yeah.
One day it'll be a head-on situation.
Yeah. Well, of course, I'm wishful thinking enough to think maybe they'll get so greedy with their control of the healthcare industry that what isn't conceivable now, the possibility of taking over, like National Health Service, the companies will have to call for it to get control of the damn costs. In other words, the big corporations have cost us so much in this field that we can't afford to let them continue. It's like having a school. Suppose every principal made a profit for stockholders on what he charged for tuition, Instead, we pay taxes and, buy that sort of service. Well, I was wondering in your recollections of Roanoke, what, just personally what you did as an organizer. I know you stayed around the motel. Did you go out to that little dining room on the main drag? Where did you eat occasionally?
Well, until I got tired of Southern cooking, restaurant cooking, I ate at the luncheons where the workers ate. I didn't go out to the Holiday Inn because I didn't really meet with the people that I
Enough
thought,
people in the lounge that were workers, yeah.
Really. And my interest was to organize the organizer as far as the implant. Well, once I got that, I used to have them into my, I had the efficiency at the motel that I stayed, Motel Dixie. I could do my own cooking, make steaks. And
Oh, they did give you an efficiency department. So you ate in then a good bit?
Well, I used to cook my own cornbread. It was minus the grease, boiled instead of fried. I just had my fill of Southern cooking.
Didn't need fat back in your green beans, huh?
No. I had enough of that when I visited the homes.
Yeah, you were invited like a preacher to a lot of Sunday dinners, huh?
I was any time I could go
Yeah.
get a meal out.
Yeah.
Anywhere.
How did the black and white workers mix?
They mixed pretty good.
In the church, the fact that the white women even came out was a sign of that. And then socially, when Crystal Lee Jordan, began hosting them at her house, calling meetings.
Yeah, we had
And she invited blacks as well there.
And the blacks
would come to the house, huh?
Yeah, many of the violations that were documented for the National Labor Relations Board were in those meetings. I used to.
You mean they would look out the window and see a license tag on a car? There was a foreman or something watching the meeting, or what do you mean by it?
No, I'm talking about the
inside
getting
plant
together of reasons to file charges.
Okay.
I would meet in the homes of the blacks, the whites, and there would always be a mixture. As a matter of fact, we had a committee, basically women, men, blacks, whites, that we controlled the newspaper there.
How'd you control the newspaper?
Well, they were usually at liberty to criticize and without argument, and we would correct them. We would have them print corrections. For instance, we had the parades in town. They misspelled the textile workers union. We had them correct that on front page. We had.
How'd you do that? By a delegation going to see them?
Delegation, and it was an impressive delegation. And we had the.
How many people would you bring in a delegation with you?
Well, we at least had a dozen committee.
And you'd let the workers speak?
basically the black and
They would be the spokesman.
spokesman.
And was it because the editor was concerned, or was
Well,
decent, or what was the reason you think he
I
threw it?
told him initially that they had labor problems there. They could maybe have more problems
Mm-hmm.
if they continued their policies.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would have the black woman or the black man, or maybe the white woman or man list the complaint that we came there with. And
That's fascinating, yeah.
we got immediate, they would correct it. For instance.
And you did that from the
salt
start of when you went there, huh?
Yeah, well, once we found out that the paper was working against us, we started that.
Did you have a company-controlled citizens committee or something that was opposing you? Or would you have a merchants committee? You had something opposing you?
That happened after I left.
There was no public, the company itself took you on, right?
The company really took us on while I was there.
When you arrived there was already a court order in effect that permitted you access to the
plants. Yeah,
to plants.
As a matter of fact.
Was that true at all? The court order would control all J.P. Stevens plants, organizers
They were
inspect
listed,
bulletin boards?
that were named in the order.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what they did at other places, but we utilized that. We took advantage of that.
Oh, the ability to walk through the plant and say hello to people as you walked right in. They tried to surround you, I guess, but they didn't achieve that.
Now, one of the things I did that they didn't do at the other campaigns, like at
Wallace, you mean, or those
Wallace
places?
and different places, they met infrequently. I would meet with my in-plant committee daily. Well, depending on what shift they were on. My office was open 24 hours a day. And then I met in a meeting at the churches or where the union hall was, union meeting. I met weekly. We didn't let up on meeting. And the same message repeated constantly helped. What would you say? Ingrain it in their minds that this is no strange task. It's just has to be done. We would have the workers have fishing excursions. You know, we had the Christmas. We took over the Christmas parade that normally was company controlled. We had the churches.
These were functions that were like civic, previously company controlled, and you used your organization. Now, if your organization was essentially black majority, did it gradually shift as you went over the whites for these public purposes?
Oh yeah, it grew.
You could finally have a proportionate.
Eventually, we had the proportionate.
It might be two-thirds white after a few months.
It took some time.
Yeah, the blacks are smart at knowing to work, let the whites step forward in those circumstances.
Oh yeah. They work together nicely. As a matter of fact, the black organizers.
Did you have a black organizer in there?
We had one from Dan.
Where'd you get him from?
He was one out of a plant at Danville.
Dan River?
Dan River, I think.
Yeah, Dan River, okay. They're in trouble, you know, I think bankrupt.
But he presented some problem because the black implant organizer recognized his inability immediately.
He was smarter than he was.
The
implant guy was a lot smarter than the organizer.
That's right.
But you got to point out to him, hey, so are most of the white workers smarter than everybody but me here, too, you know.
I told them they were smarter than me.
Yeah, well, you were being modest, but
No,
the truth is, most of the people you put
truth
into
is-
motion were better than the ones they'd sent you from the north.
That's right.
No, that's an act of modesty on your part. You were an essential
really,
ingredient of the victory. Without you, what you say is true in modesty, but I think it's essential to be the catalyst force of an organizer.
For instance, the guy that was not modest was this Wilbur Hobby you mentioned.
Yeah.
He was astounded when he came to Roanoke Rapids. The bumper stickers, the union stickers.
He hadn't seen an open
It was never
TWA campaign.
open,
Yeah.
like it was there.
Yeah,
Roanoke
remember he was a tobacco worker, but he had only encountered TWA scared
He was
people.
all over the state, and he.
I know,
had
but he
never
only
seen
saw.
anything.
That's right, but he told you that he was
Yeah,
astounded.
he was. Well,
He's usually an honest guy in his reactions. Yeah,
He was.
He didn't bluff as much as the
No.
TWA guys.
No.
He was more an honest, big, burly, fat worker,
Yeah.
and
So-
he remained a tobacco worker. One guy estimated him after, he went back in the plant. They said, what did his 10 years mean? Well, it wasn't that they were brilliant, but his honesty, the biggest contribution he left is his honesty allowed a number of women to come forward and a number of blacks in the
Yeah.
state leadership, which up till then every state president had kept from happening,
Happening, yeah.
And that's what, you served that catalyst function at Roanoke Rapids.
Yeah.
When you don't allow that to happen, you prevent organization.
That's right. That's why I say I saw that lacking in the other campaigns.
That's right.
We would go to visit,
Mhm.
take a busload or
Be all whites
10
when you got
carloads.
to these places sometime.
Well, hell, when we showed up, we were the crowd.
Yeah, they didn't know how to bring their people
They
out.
didn't know how to bring them out.
They also used to be so scared of organizing blacks that they would offend the whites. They didn't understand it was when the blacks came out, they freed the whites to come out.
Well, I used that story that Wilbur Hobby told.
Mhm.
The only color J.P. Stevens was interested in was green. He
Yeah.
wasn't interested in black. He wasn't
That's
interested in
right.
white.
Wilbur absorbed well, and therefore he contributed. It was sad that they nailed him, but they nailed him apparently on grounds where they had him, so he went back in.
I thought maybe during that tenure, after even I left, that they would repeal the right to work law, but that
It's so
everything died.
far from that. You got to remember, Jesse Helms runs the state. Since you left, they've lost the Democratic senator, and it's replaced by an even worse conservative
Sure.
than Helms, if that's possible, his stooge, John East. So what you got is two of the worst U.S. senators, the two worst in the United States Senate, which means they're anti-labor, they're anti-Democratic Party, they're anti-minimum wage, you name it.
Yeah.
So you needed more than ever, Eli, is another way to look at it, huh? So why don't you plan on coming down when I'm there? You just
Well,
got to be
I'm
sure I'm
thinking
there.
about
You
it
know my
because,
home phone.
I'm thinking about it.
You have my home phone, don't you?
Maybe you
Let
should
me
give
let me
it to me.
let me give it to you here. I'll strike out the one that's if
Okay.
this one is an office number that's been changed, and the bottom line there is the 929-1059. Is the main thing is with me gone some is to know I'm there,
Sure.
And then I don't know whether Pearl and you are taking vacation or what you're doing for getting away down.
Well, we were
Your
thinking
kids are,
maybe-
all your kids are gone now, huh?
Well, Kathy's in school, but she's no problem.
She's old enough to drive too?
Yeah. We were thinking maybe about going to a beach or maybe to visit my sister-in-law, her sister.
Mm-hmm.
She lives in a town called Lexington.
Oh, I know Lexington. Yeah. You just go out of your way a little and then go to Lexington afterwards,
Yeah.
You come down I-77, from the
Yeah.
turnpike, And then you cut over through Winston-Salem and towards
Yeah.
Greensboro and on into Chapel Hill on 54.
How long does it take you to drive to Chapel?
Under 8 hours.
Under 8 hours?
Yeah, less than 8 hours, yeah. All right, what did it take you from Roanoke Rapids going home?
See, I used to go the long route.